service, knowing that you might be involved in a war?
Well, I wasn't too sure as to what I wanted to do. I thought about going to possibly to Wilson Junior College at the time, but not with any particular goal in mind. And I just was, I just wasn't too sure. And I even though I felt that things were going to get worse, that even so, that I would rather be a part of something that interested me. And I looked at the different branches and felt that the Navy would be an interesting experience.
During the peace and war times of your Navy career?
Well, of course, I was on two ships. The USS Arkansas. And we have a guided missile cruiser now that's by that name, but the Arkansas I'm talking about was built in the World War I period and went through all of World War II, both Atlantic and Pacific. And I was on that ship that we had the North Atlantic duty. We, as I mentioned earlier before we started taping this, that I was already in the Navy before Pearl Harbor, and when Pearl Harbor, in fact, even before Pearl Harbor, we took a convoy up to Newfoundland on the eastern coast of Canada and back. And we went under completely blacked out conditions. So I don't know what happened at Pearl Harbor, but we were ready for trouble in the Atlantic. Completely blacked out, full cruise, no partial cruise, full cruise and everything like that.
Did you see any action in the Atlantic?
Convoy duty. We took the convoy up to Iceland after Pearl Harbor. Then we took a convoy to I want to say we had the destroyers dropping depth charges on possible submarine contacts.
You both said.
Yeah, right.
Why did you transfer over to the Pacific and you left the Arkansas?
Well, I was on the Arkansas not quite a year. It was an interesting experience, but being that it was an older ship, it was you were completely. I don't know how it got through the whole war. By that I mean you were always replacing switches. You had to always be making spare parts because some of the equipment was so old that you couldn't get.
You were getting
parts.
brittle, yeah.
And so we were just completely. We had torpedo blisters, which they don't have on the newer battleships. And every time we'd go out and fire our guns, which were 12-inch, it was the only battleship on active duty with 12-inch, because the other ships had 14 or new ones 16. We'd have to come back in and pump out those torpedo blisters because they would take on water. And I got tired of patching the patchwork, and I put in for new construction. Volunteered because they were always building new ships.
And you went over
and so I was accepted for the light cruiser, and
what was the name of the cruiser?
Birmingham. Named after Birmingham, Alabama, and put that in commission in 1943, and back to the Atlantic we went because they were going to invade Sicily, and they needed all the ships that they could lay their hands on. And Sicily is the island that's off the southern tip of Italy in the Mediterranean. And went through that invasion. We were dive bombed by German dive bombers and things like that. And we used our guns against planes and against shore targets, like German tanks were coming down towards the beachhead to try and throw our forces off the beach. And we're sitting offshore firing 6-inch guns and picking off.
What ship was the close calls you had on
What, in the Pacific. We were dive bombed in the Mediterranean but not hit. But in the Pacific, we were in part of the 3rd Fleet and the 5th Fleet as far as the carrier forces. But when we got out there, they decided to invade Bougainville because it's right next door to Guadalcanal. We missed the Guadalcanal invasion, but Bougainville had been bypassed, and it was so close that they were posing a problem with air attacks. They had hidden planes and all that business. So we were covering the invasion of Bougainville in the summer of '43 when we were hit. they're tainting. We were hit by a skip bomb in the stern and a direct bomb hit on turret 4 and a aerial torpedo in the bow. And we laughed about it later, but we were hit in 3 places. So they ran up with the
tunnel.
Anyhow, we ran up, the main deck repair ran up with electrical submersible pump and opened the hatch in the bow and went through it, lowered it, and wondered why they were losing suction. When they got lights down there, they found that there was the plates on the starboard side were ruptured, and on the port side there was a hole big enough that you could drive the Jeep through. So the pump could not work effectively because it's trying to pump out the ocean. So that was our first time. We had about 40 killed and wounded that time, and that was really very, very extremely low, considering we were hit in 3 places and still it had that small amount.
Was the next time the time you got injured?
Yeah, oh yeah. We had near misses in between. We were took part in the attacks on Wake Island, Tarawa, many of the other islands, the Caroline Islands, and we took part in the invasion of Sarpantini and Guam, the Marianas, and we had near misses. But the next time when we were hit was invasion of the Philippines.
Pause for a second.
Yeah, that was October 24th, 1944, so just a couple days ago. It was 39 years since that happened.
Almost 40.
But, yeah.
Coming up on 40.
And we were covering the invasion of the Philippines when the Japanese hit one of our carriers with 1 bomb.
What carrier was that?
That was the.
Forgive myself.
Yeah, I would draw.
A blank.
Yeah, this is the Princeton. Princeton. There are Princeton carriers since that time, but this was a cruiser carrier built on a cruiser hull, not the escort carriers, but a cruiser hull that had the same power plant that we had. And anyhow, it was hit by a bomb and set off a chain reaction among the planes that were fueled and loaded for the invasion of the Philippines. And we were fighting the fires on the carrier, and we broke away once because of aerial and sub contacts, and we're coming back in a second time to continue fighting the fire when it exploded. The rear magazines on the Princeton exploded.
You were on deck at that time?
Yeah, I was with a group about 7 or 8, and 1 minute we're talking, next minute we're flat on our backs, and 10,000 ton, well, with fuel and ammunition, I read later, it probably weighed about 12,500, but here the cruiser was just, the whole thing was just shaking from the concussions. And I fortunately did not hit the side of the shield around this lookout point, and so otherwise I would have been knocked unconscious and would have been bled to death. And then after a few moments I picked myself up, and everybody else was as still as anything. They were, I was in shock, but there was not anything, not any voice, nothing. And so then I climbed down the exterior ladders and down to the main deck, and on the watertight doors you have a wheel that you twirl and release the dogs, and I release it, step through, turn around, and close them. I went through each watertight door. I went through several and opened and closed them, because that's ingrained in your watertight integrity. You don't leave doors open in battle to protect the ship. Closed all of them, went in the sick bay and sat down until they could take a look at me.
And how had you been injured?
Pardon?
How had you been injured?
Well, when the magazines blew up, it sent fragments of bombs and torpedoes and pieces of ship flying all over our ship. There was a picture in the Chicago Tribune 6 months later, which I have, and it showed the ship, and you could see all the superstructure, not the hull, but the superstructure above the main deck was just like a sieve, and punctured all in hundreds of different places. So what I was hit was pieces of metal.
Shrapnel all through you?
Yeah, about a dozen different places, and I still have a piece up here, and I have a piece here. And a few years ago when I had a upper GI test. They told me in a civilian hospital that I had a piece of metal in my chest. So I was hitting about a dozen places and cut open on hands and arms, shoulder, and things like that. And, you know, my fingers were banged up, but I didn't even lose a little finger. When they put me on a hospital ship, and then they flew me out to Pearl Harbor where they operated on me, and I was on the hospital, operating table about 4 or 5 hours. They gave me 3 pints of plasma on board the ship. And after I got to Pearl, as part of the operation, they gave me 3 pints of whole blood.
That pretty well it ended your military career?
Yeah, I never went down. I was in the hospital for 6 months, and I was scheduled for limited duty. I was here in Chicago at Navy Pier when Germany surrendered. And because I had a surplus of people, even though I was regular Navy and they could have held me for a couple more years, they gave me the option of staying in or accepting the discharge. They weren't going to hold me to the remaining 2 years, so I elected at that point, since I had, enough of an experience to...
Well, you'd had over 4 years.
Oh yeah, I had 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. We never forget that. I mean, the exact time in service.
Combat air patrols directed from the carrier Essex broke up their formations, but the fighters and the heavy barrage of anti-aircraft fire did not stop a Japanese bomber from punching through to crash into the Princeton, hitting squarely on the flight deck. Its 100-pound bomb plowed through the hangar, setting off a tumultuous blaze.
When I saw a suicide attack for the first time, I was very shocked. The fighter who was caught in the anti-aircraft fire made a body attack on the enemy's carrier. I felt how brave he is. Congratulations. But at the same time, I felt, was there any way to help him? So many different feelings came to mind.
The cruiser Birmingham was sent alongside to assist in the firefighting.
The Princeton got hit, so they abandoned ship. The USS Cass & Young picked them up. We had air attacks all day. Then they called us to come alongside and fight the fire. So we were tied up alongside of the Princeton. Princeton was on our starboard side. And we thought we had the fire out. And commander of the Task Force 58 said we should take it in tow. So I had just left the starboard side, went back to get ready. A guy by the name of, he was another boatswain mate, Mahoney. We said we could handle it, so we were getting ready to take her in tow. Man, all at once we heard this explosion, and I thought it was another kamikaze.
The fire had reignited and reached down into the bomb magazines. The blast blew her stern off. Alongside, the Birmingham was caught up in the detonation. It blasted her superstructure, killing 200 crewmen.
There's people laying all around, legs off, arms off, big chunks of steel in them. This one guy, Pedro Medlin, laying there with his leg off. He asked me to give him a shot of morphine. I did. And I guess he was in shock. He said, Strigo, give me a shot of morphine. I said, Pedro, I just did. You marked a big X on their forehead. He said, no, you didn't. You don't want to help me. I'd hurt. If I give him another shot, he'd have died.
The Princeton remained a floating inferno throughout the afternoon until she was dispatched by American torpedoes that evening.